Assalamu alaikum, Nazreen. Nazreen, this is Sani Khan and you're watching new episode of Inside Financial Markets. Today we are going to discuss the Pakistani market in context of the international arena and the financial markets. And we have got with us Mr. Seeth R. Freeman, who is an international financial and equity market expert. Mr. Seeth Freeman, welcome to the show. So coming to the first question, Mr. Freeman, when we spoke last time, it was probably April, some 6 months back, we were talking about the world being locked down, nothing taking place, no business, and every activity was connected, every resumption of the business activity was connected with the availability of the vaccine. Where do you see things now? And going forward, when do you see this vaccine thing coming along?
Thank you for having me again. It's nice that you put this in perspective or context from our last talk, but here we are, and it's practically the end of October, and globally we're still in a pandemic situation, and it seems that some countries are actually having either an extension of what's been going on or what started back in February, March, or a new wave of infections. And so it's still a very serious situation without having vaccines globally.
So we are still hearing that US is doing something with World Health Organization and China is still making its best of the effort. Do you see some kind of politics around that whose vaccine is going to come first? Because people talk about trillions of the business behind this vaccine.
Well, so from here, we're reading about China and also Russia developing vaccines. And I believe there's 3 or 4 companies here in the United States and global pharma companies working on vaccines. I was reading about continued, final phase testing. 30,000 subjects were recruited for the final study. So things are moving along. In terms of politics, I don't think there's politics slowing it down, but there's certainly some questions about there were questions about whether a vaccine would be available in time for the election, the U.S. election, which is now basically 11 days away. So it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So it's still up in the air, and it's political because it's putting a lot of pressure on world leaders because this virus has to be taken under control.
Understood. How does the past 6 months have been in terms of the oil, gold, and specific to the currencies? We are seeing a dollar which is a bit weakening.
Well, let's start with oil. Oil prices have recovered significantly since the last time we spoke, but they're still very low. And although it appears that demand rose in the last few months, it's hard to imagine that we're going to see the kind of demand, in particular growth in demand, that we had, back before, back in January under normal conditions. So oil prices have recovered significantly. However, here in the United States, a big industry was created to do what's called fracking, which is horizontal drilling. And the costs of producing oil on fracking is significantly higher than conventional pumping. And so many of the frack companies and the suppliers to the fracking companies have filed for Chapter 11. They're having severe problems because the oil price continues to be too low for that to be a profitable activity. So I don't expect oil demand to increase significantly until we see a significant increase in industrial demand. Now, China, on the other hand, had some GDP growth announced. In terms of other commodities, base metals and so forth rise. They're a pretty good indicator of demand, industrial demand, manufacturing things. And gold is a safe haven. We've got plenty of uncertainty. Gold has risen. The dollar, you've mentioned the dollar's weaker, but not by much. And in fact, there was some strengthening this morning. It's still a safe haven currency, and there's tremendous demand for dollars, even in spite of the fact that the Fed has reduced interest rates, and we expect to have continued low interest rates in the near future.
So the oil, which is weakening, are there some political implications on the Middle East region?
Well, it puts pressure on the oil-producing countries that are dependent on oil revenue. I think that the politics has to do probably more in terms of Pakistan, India, other countries where oil is a very expensive commodity. That it does put some political pressure to the extent oil begins to rise again on domestic policymakers. On the other hand, because so many countries are net importers, developing countries, that low oil prices are favorable for those economies. We're seeing pressure already in reading about reports about, as I mentioned, pressure domestically in oil-producing countries because they're so dependent on oil revenues and providing a lot of subsidies to their populations. So it's going to cause a shift if this continues for very long, and I do really believe we're kind of in a structural change until whatever normal the new normal is going to be, until that's kind of identified about where things are going for all of us globally. I mean, the most interesting situation is that this pandemic knows no boundaries, so it's affecting every country in the world.
So we have seen that Iran had been quite used to, with the supply, more production and less supplies, and Iran used to supply oil to China, Russia, and India through the back doors. And now is the situation that there is very little demand, and the other Arab nations are facing the similar challenge which Iran had. So do you see an Iran which is more powerful because it has faced this kind of situations before, and Arab nations who are facing these kind of situations nowadays? There will be two blocks, one which is Arab-Israeli bloc and the other one which is Iran-led bloc.
Well, Iran is also facing problems because of sanctions, and its economy is relatively weak, irrespective of oil prices. So this is just going to exacerbate the situation internally, domestically in Iran. It's unclear what policy directions might occur if Vice President Biden wins the presidency here in the United States. In the more recently, there's been some new deals made between Israel and a number of the UAE countries to try to normalize trade, normalize relations. And I would expect that to continue, frankly. And this would have I guess, diplomatically, politically, geopolitically, somewhat reduce Iran's strength in the region. I think that's probably part of the strategy.
Okay, so how about the upcoming US elections? What are the things that you expect to be changed after the elections? And by the way, are elections going to be held on November 3rd?
Well, we have a very high level of uncertainty, because of the economics, the coronavirus to begin with. And now we have the added uncertainty of the outcome of the election. The polls are indicating that Biden is going to win, but there could still be a surprise. It's also unclear exactly how the Trump administration is going to react to the results. In general, investors, and not just financial investors, but also corporations that have long-term strategies, and agencies and large companies that are involved in infrastructure. These projects require some degree of confidence in the future, and so I think getting the election just over with one way or the other is going to eliminate a big piece of uncertainty that we face here. There's an expectation that if Biden wins, infrastructure projects will increase, and he's been talking about using those to help boost the economy, increase jobs, and we have very old infrastructure actually in the United States that does need to be replaced. So that may be positive. There's some also expectation, on the other hand, that over time we might see taxes rise, and that concerns corporations. But if we look at the way the stock market's improved so dramatically, even though we have relative volatility, things are generally looking positive.
Understood. Mr. Freeman, it's time for a short break. Let's meet after a short break. वेलकम बैक नाज़रीन। नाज़रीन, वक्फे से पहले हम मिस्टर सी फ्रीमन से बातचीत कर रहे थे कि कमोडिटीज़, एशियन मार्केट्स और अमेरिका के जो इंतखाबात हैं, इलेक्शंस हैं, उसके फाइनेंशियल मार्केट्स पर क्या असरात पड़ सकते हैं। प्रोग्राम के इस सेगमेंट में हम मिस्टर सी फ्रीमन से बातचीत करेंगे कि अगर मिस्टर ट्रंप जो है वो इलेक्शंस नहीं जीत पाते और उनके मुखालिफ ही इलेक्शन जीत जाते हैं, तो फिर चाइना और अमेरिका की जो पॉलिसीज़ हैं उसमें क्या तब्दीली आएगी, उसमें क्या चेंज आएगी। सो मिस्टर फ्रीमन, we were talking about the US elections. Now, if Mr. Trump is unable to win or make as a result of no elections, do you see a change in policy towards China?
No, I don't think that we're going to see a major shift towards China. That is somewhat of a political, we would call it a hot potato here in the United States. In spite of all the rhetoric coming out of the Trump administration, the U.S. continues to run relatively high deficits, trade deficits, including China. So, that's not going away anytime soon, although both candidates, Trump's had time, and Biden is suggesting a continued trend towards increasing U.S. domestic, returning manufacturing back to the United States. That's both a political and a practical approach in terms of increasing jobs and vocational jobs. But I don't see a major shift towards China, and I think there's also larger global political issues in terms of the installations that China is putting into into the South Sea, and so forth. And we may actually see a tougher approach towards China, frankly.
So we have seen in the past that with the wave of increase in the cases in US, there was some pressure with China vis-a-vis the trade, the otherwise worsening of the relationships with the China. Do you consider or think that worst has been seen by the world, and now the relationship between China and US would remain stable?
We have to understand that when the information that might be in the press and on TV about relationships may not tell the whole story. I think throughout all times, there's back channel discussions, there's all kinds of communications and deals being made that don't necessarily hit the headlines. So it's hard to say, to what extent we have news about friction with China that is political as opposed to critical. So what I'm suggesting is I think there will be trade. There's still concerns. There's a lot of concern right now, actually, about there's still intellectual property, and particularly, there was sanctions and prohibitions against doing business with Huawei, for example. Large Chinese IT and electronics companies, and I think there's still a lot of concern about whether data. We've had TikTok. I don't know if you've heard about the president insisting that TikTok be sold and so forth. So we're still going to see some of this, no matter which president we have for the next 4 years.
There is going to be a continuity of the policies towards China. How about this Asia region? How do you look at the Asia region post-pandemic or during the rest of this pandemic period?
Well, I think that in general, Asia is going to continue to outperform in terms of growth. But in terms of foreign investment, I don't see a lot of money flows going out from U.S. investors and even international investors until we have greater clarity on what the new normal is going to look like. I just think investors are relatively risk averse, and to the extent the dollar continues to strengthen and foreign, the current currencies in investable countries decline, that causes portfolio losses. So unless the markets rise rapidly. So I just think investors are generally going to be averse. On the other hand, there is so much index-based investing now that just money coming into a fund will be distributed to various markets according to the weighting in the index. And that tends to benefit all developing emerging countries, irregardless of their own specific, country-specific trends.
If you were to compare the India, China, and Vietnam, except for Vietnam, we are seeing the outflows from India, from Pakistan. But why US and European nations are relish on the Vietnam? What is in it? What would you see in Vietnam?
It's it's sentiment, it's risk aversion, during a high risk, high volatility time, and we have seen economic improvement in the United States over the last 4 months, and I just think we're going to continue to see a conservative approach by international investors. And in terms of investment in Vietnam, in many ways, it is an alternative to China for quite a bit of manufacturing. So I think we're going to see continued growth and interest in Vietnam.
Understood. So what is your view about the Pakistani market? Would there be some interest from US and other investors?
Well, to be frank, and I continue to follow emerging markets, at least here in the US. Frankly, there's not a lot of discussion about investing in the Pakistan market. There's quite a bit of concern about politics, and certainly the Trump administration's raised concerns about Pakistan, the same sort of legacy concerns. So I think there's obviously a core group of adventurous investors, but I think that the Pakistan authorities and stock market agencies really need to develop a robust public relations campaign and show what the opportunities are in the Pakistan market.
So isn't it because China has taken stakes into the Pakistani market and integration has taken place and China has taken over the Pakistani stock market? Is it because of that, or is it because of the risk management and other investor-related issues or sentiments? Or is it because of the FATF-related observations?
I think part of it is frankly, unawareness.
Okay.
Is part of it. There's not that many, from an institutional standpoint, not that many investable. And when I say investable, part of the issue has to be share liquidities and the ability to get in and out of the market without having market impact. And I just think it's generally a lack of awareness, and there's frankly a continued strong perception about corruption in Pakistan.
So if you were to give a short message to the regulators and the Ministry of Finance, what would be your message?
Well, I think investors need to be educated about what the opportunity is in Pakistan, both for private equity and for securities transactions, and to demonstrate to investors that they can trade safely, securely, and they can also have confidence in the tax regime and just frankly the administration, the back office of investing in the market. So I think the country needs a very strong PR program to talk to particularly U.S. investors.
Understood. So Mr. Freeman, thank you very much for your kind attention and time. I'm grateful that you're always, your response is always favorable. You squeeze your time and you give your quality time to the GTV network. On behalf of this TV network, I'm grateful to you. Thank you very much. नाज़रीन, वक्त हुआ एक ब्रेक का, मिलते हैं एक वक्त के बाद। नाज़रीन, आज के प्रोग्राम में हमने बातचीत की सीथ फ्रीमन से। सीथ फ्रीमन वही साहब हैं कि जिनकी कंपनी ने इंडिया का पहला ETF जो है वो न्यूयॉर्क स्टॉक एक्सचेंज में लॉन्च किया था। सीथ फ्रीमन is regarded as an authority at Bloomberg and other news agencies in terms of matters relating to the Asian financial markets. आपकी वियतनाम, इंडिया और पाकिस्तानी मार्केट पर काफ़ी गिरफ्त है और आपके एनालिसिस को लोग फॉलो करते हैं। मिस्टर फ्रीमन ने पाकिस्तान से मुताल्लिक तबसरा करते हुए हमें बताया कि पाकिस्तान की जो इकॉनमी है ग्लोबल कॉन्टेक्स्ट में उसके लिए काफ़ी पोटेंशियल मौजूद है, लेकिन पाकिस्तानी स्टॉक मार्केट और पाकिस्तान में इन्वेस्टर की प्रोटेक्शन से मुताल्लिक परसेप्शंस के इश्यूज़ को सही से एड्रेस करने की ज़रूरत है। उन्होंने बैनुल-अक़वामी फ़ाइनेंशियल मार्केट्स का तज़किया देते हुए हमें बताया कि ग्लोबली जब भी कोई बड़ा क्राइसिस हो या कोई बड़ी गैर यकीनी हो तो उसको इन्वेस्टर्स की निगाहों से दो तरह से देखा जा सकता है। जब डॉलर में लोग सेफ्टी फील कर रहे हों, लोग जब डॉलर में मूव हो रहे हों, तो इसके मानी ये हैं कि रीजन्स जो हैं उनकी स्टेबिलिटी जो है वो मसाइल का शिकार है। और जब ग्लोबली लोग किसी बड़े ख़तरे को देख रहे होते हैं, खुदा न खास्ता किसी आलमी जंग को देख रहे होते हैं, या उससे भी बड़ी कसाद बाज़ारी जैसे 1930 में हुई, उस तरह की कोई सिचुएशन को बड़े इन्वेस्टर्स फोर्स ही कर रहे होते हैं, तो फिर सबसे ज़्यादा महफूज एसेट क्लास जो है वो सोने को कंसिडर करते हुए लोग गोल्ड में इन्वेस्टमेंट करते हैं। सो रीसेंट जो सिचुएशन है कि जिसमें गोल्ड में बहुत बड़े पैमाने पे इन्वेस्टमेंट हो रही है, गोल्ड की जो प्राइसेस हैं वो बहुत ही हाई लेवल्स को टच कर रही हैं, दिस शोज़ कि देयर इज़ समथिंग इन द बैकड्रॉप जो कि नज़र नहीं आ रहा है या जिसको छुपाया जा रहा है। वैक्सीन के ऊपर बातचीत करते हुए मिस्टर फ्रीमन ने कहा कि इसमें गो के चाइना और अमेरिका की पॉलिटिक्स का इतना अमल दखल नहीं नज़र आता, मगर ये सच है कि इट्स अ मल्टी ट्रिलियन डॉलर सॉर्ट ऑफ अ डील जिसको WHO जो है वो कंफ्यूज है कि वो किसके साथ जाए और किसके इन्फ्लुएंस को ज़्यादा कंसिडर करे। सो बहुत सारी बातें हैं इन कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ द चाइना एंड US रिलेशंस अकॉर्डिंग टू हिम जो कि रिपोर्ट नहीं होती। उनका ये भी कहना था कि इलेक्शन में अगर ट्रंप नहीं जीत पाते तब भी अमेरिका की मजबूरी होगी कि वो चाइना को मनोअन अपने साथ लेकर चले, बिकॉज़ चाइना के ऊपर अमेरिका जो है वो ह्यूजली, डेंसली और ग्रॉसली डिपेंडेंट है। जिस तरह पाकिस्तान एक एग्रीकल्चरल मुल्क होने के बावजूद अपनी 60% दालें इंपोर्ट करता है, गंदम इंपोर्ट करता है, चीनी को भी इंपोर्ट बहरहाल वो करता है। सो उसी तरह का मामला कुछ अमेरिका का भी है कि अमेरिका में भी इंडस्ट्रीज़ तकरीबन मसाइल का शिकार है एंड दे आर हेविली डिपेंडेंट अपॉन द चाइना। पाकिस्तान से मुताल्लिक उन्होंने फर्दर कहा कि पाकिस्तान की मार्केट में इंटरेस्ट इस वजह से शायद नहीं आता कि पाकिस्तान में इन्वेस्टर बेस जो है वो कम होता जा रहा है, और उन्होंने एक से ज़्यादा मरतबा इस बात को ज़ोर देकर कहा कि पाकिस्तान की मार्केट की जो परसेप्शन है उसको ठीक करने के लिए बड़े पैमाने पर अवेयरनेस की कैंपेन चलाने की ज़रूरत है। नाज़रीन, वक्त निकालने का शुक्रिया। अगले हफ्ते मुलाकात होगी किसी नए मौजू के साथ। इजाज़त दीजिए। अल्लाह हाफ़िज़।